Okay. There's another option for China to militarily attack the U.S. Navy in the South China Sea. You can read through this when you have time. So it's this is a really important objective for China for its resources. The U.S. is uses its navy to police international waters and defend its allies. So let's look at the power rankings. So here again, if you roll between 11 and 12, China wins the battle against the USA. China has complete dominance and control over the sea. US influence removed from Asia. And this would be +5 for China. USA gets -5. If ASEAN and Japan are allied to the US, if they're still in Pax Americana, this will be -2 to both countries. 7 to 10 is neither side wins. And this would affect the trade deal between the two countries. So basically, in this case, if China does militarily attack the US, it's really going to impact on the trade deal. The power ranking stays the same. If it's between 3 and 6, the US and Asian allies defend against Chinese attack and reclaim the disputed and artificial islands in the South China Sea. For example, the Spratly Islands. If it's 1 or 2, China loses the war so badly that the Chinese public rise up against it. So again, there's a risk of revolution. So this map is quite interesting to kind of look at the aerial defenses of China. These are the security partnerships that the US has. China basically wants the US to be removed beyond this sea, the first island chain, and it wants the US in the long term, its influence to be beyond this as well. Okay, so that's really important to remember. China, by enhancing your soft power, you can alter these probabilities and build close. So an example of this would be building closer ties with ASEAN and Japan and remove US diplomatic influence from the region. Very quickly, we're going to finish up in just a few minutes. If you are the USA, you can use pretty much the same instruments. So the USA can encircle islands claimed by China. It's -5 to China. You can impose an economic embargo on China. This is -1 to China's power ranking. You can also, if China does declare an air identification zone, you can respond to this by flying US jets over the South China Sea. So you can basically say, you've declared an air identification zone. We don't recognize it. We're going to continue to fly US fighter jets over this zone. If that happens, China loses 0.5, USA gains 0.5. If you decide to attack Chinese targets, you'll have a similar situation of calculating the odds and rolling the dice. So if the US Navy and Air Force attack the Chinese military and islands in the South China Sea, you have this matrix here that gives you the different distributions and outcomes. What's important to recognize is the US seeks to limit the rise of China and preserve its influence in Asia and protect US security allies in the region. And the US is worried about the militarization of the South China Sea and the fact that China wants to move the US military beyond the first island chain, which is here, and then ultimately to remove the US influence beyond the second island chain, which is here. You can look through the different probabilities of success. I won't go through it now. Just remember, again, if China managed to successfully negotiate with ASEAN and Japan to leave Pax Americana, these odds will change. The very last thing is ASEAN or Japan. If you use hard power instruments, these are the distributions. Okay. Now, just something that's quite important is Japan and ASEAN do not have as strong as a navy as China. So these are actually quite weak measures. They don't really harm China very much because China's military is more powerful than Japan. Therefore, this does not hurt China as much. Also, if ASEAN or Japan imposes an economic embargo on goods being sold to China, it does hurt China a little bit. But if China imposes an economic embargo on your country, you're going to get -1. And this is an example of asymmetrical interdependence. Japan and Asia are more dependent on Chinese trade than China is dependent on Japan and ASEAN. Just finally, with this, ASEAN and Japan need the permission of the USA, or if you're allied to China, to do military attacks on an opponent or territory. So again, you'd roll the dice with America or China, depending on who you're attacking. This is because neither country has a strong enough military to fight a war against a superpower. You have to be smart about how you use this power. Be careful how you use it. Like the lecture, the Power and Security lecture, match ambitions to capabilities. Be aware of how much power you have and the limits to it. And military attack is often used as a desperate last resort. And the final thing is, you will be assessed on how well you achieve diplomacy and the use of hard power. Please do not just joke around with this. Don't just decide from the very first minute, I'm going to militarily attack you. This affects your grade. Depending on how well you do, how well your group does, this will affect your grade, which is 30%. Okay? So, good luck with it. If you have any questions, just ask me.